Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and happy Customer Service Week. Welcome to today's HDI webinar. Today's webinar features the lovely availability of HDI training, education, and certification, including Customer Service Representative, one of our most popular courses. It's where technical support professionals belong, and we'd like to remind you not to miss the new Service Management World Conference, October 15th through 17th in Orlando, Florida. You can connect with HDI on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and our members-only community site, HDI Connect. Very active conversations about there. I'm Roy Atkinson, HDI Senior Writer Analyst, and we have just a few housekeeping announcements before we begin. If you are experiencing any technical problems, please refresh your browser. It's the best thing you can do. You can participate in the Q&A session by asking questions at any time during the webcast, and will be answered during the Q&A session toward the end of the webcast. Slides will advance automatically throughout the event. There will be audience polls today, and you can respond in the Vote tab below the presentation window. So you might want to locate that right now before we start. Remember that today's webinar will be available on demand shortly after the completion of this live webcast, and you'll also receive an email reminder to let you know it's available. With me today is Jeff Toister, and Jeff is a regular speaker at HDI events. He's authored 3 books, including the best-selling The Service Culture Handbook, a step-by-step guide to getting your employees obsessed with customer service. More than 140,000 people on 6 continents have taken his video-based training courses on LinkedIn, also known as lynda.com. And Jeff was named one of the top 30 customer service professionals in the world by Global Gurus. He was also named one of the top 25 customer experience influencers by Panviva. FeedSpot has named Jeff his Inside Customer Service blog to be one of the top 50 customer service blogs on the planet. So he's got some credentials, is what I'm saying to you. Jeff holds a Certified Professional in Learning and Performance, CPLP, certification from the Association for Talent Development. So suffice it to say, Jeff knows whereof he speaks, and aside from that, I happen to know he's a very nice guy. Please give a rousing welcome to Jeff Toister. Take it away, Jeff.
Well, thank you, Roy. I appreciate that. And I'm trying to imagine the rousing welcome on a webinar. You know, maybe people are sitting at their computers, like, kind of sarcastically clapping, knowing no one can hear it. I hope you all can hear me. So thanks for joining us today on Customer Service Week, the midpoint. And I'm excited to talk to you about analyst engagement today. I want to start with a quick story, and maybe this has happened to you. I imagine some of you support your customers via phone, and for those of you who don't, perhaps you've worked in an environment where you do in the past. I just want you to imagine what happens when the phone system goes down. Now, particularly in a Tier 1 environment where we're reacting to cases just as they come in. In a lot of cases, we're just kind of looking at each other. You know, there's not much to do. We hope the phones come back up. And then when they don't, you know, maybe eventually we start looking for excuses to get out early. If it's a nice day out, there's better things to do besides sit around and twiddle our thumbs if phone is our primary avenue of support. Now, that's not what happened at Rackspace a few years ago when the phone system went down. And if you're not familiar with Rackspace, they host big computer networks. And this was a phone system that connected their support team to external customers. So big enterprise level stuff. And what happened when their phone system went down was a little bit unusual. One of their employees said, you know what, I think that I should tweet my personal phone number and invite customers to contact me that way, which is what they did. And another person said, hey, that's a great idea. I'm going to do the same thing. Imagine your analyst doing that, just tweeting their personal number, using their personal Twitter handles and saying, hey, we have a little technical difficulties here, but you can still reach us. Now, to me, that's an excellent example of engagement. That's an engaged employee who's going above and beyond what we could ever expect of them. And to me, the best part of this whole story is this was not a written procedure. It wasn't something that they learned in a training class. Their managers didn't ask them to do it. They didn't even ask for permission. They just did it because they thought it was the right thing to do. And they ended up supporting their customers for over 4 hours using their personal phone numbers. So it's an example of engagement, and we're going to talk today about 5 ways you can quickly boost analyst engagement in your service desk environment. Now, before we do that, though, I want to see if we can launch a poll question, get you involved. And again, Roy said you can locate this, the vote tab, which is below the presentation window. The poll here is, what is your biggest engagement challenge? And I've taken the liberty of kind of looking at some of the big ones. So you may have another challenge that's not on the list. But some of the options here are maybe it's turnover. We're losing talented analysts. Maybe productivity, because they're not working as quickly as we'd like them to. The quality of their work's not what we want it to be. The service that they're providing to our customers is not what it is. Or maybe it's just commitment. They don't seem to be committed. And let's acknowledge that using your personal phone number to support customers for 4 hours is a different level of commitment than we might normally expect. So let me give you maybe another 15 seconds or so to respond to the poll. We'll see what your biggest issues are, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about 5 different ways that we can quickly boost engagement.
We'll just leave it up there for a few more seconds, give you a chance to answer, and then I'll stop the voting and hand it back to Jeff. Okay, we're going to stop the voting now.
All right, we got a few votes. So productivity looks like it's the big one here. 42% of you said productivity. 44% of you said productivity is the biggest issue. Interesting, service was not the biggest issue. It was more productivity followed by turnover. So we're losing people who might not be engaged, and just that general commitment. So excellent. Thanks for participating in the poll. Whatever your top challenge is, I want you to keep that in mind today as we go through the webinar and we examine some different ways that we can boost analyst engagement and do it quickly. So I am based in San Diego. You may have visited San Diego. Perhaps some of you are in San Diego as well today, or you've heard about San Diego. You've seen the postcards. And what I'd like you to do is I want you to picture San Diego. We're going to kind of clear our brains for just a moment and see if you can get an image of what San Diego looks like. Now, I imagine, I'm trying to imagine what you're imagining, that a lot of you are seeing some common or consistent images. I imagine things that come to mind are palm trees or the beach, the Hotel del Coronado, beautiful, iconic part of the San Diego scene. Maybe it's the San Diego Zoo, perhaps, or Balboa Park. All of these are beautiful, iconic San Diego images, and perhaps you're imagining one or more of these. Now, I want to share with you what I picture when I picture San Diego. And you'll see this pop up on your screen in just a moment. This picture was taken in the city of San Diego, within the city limits. You don't see any palm trees or beaches. The zoo is nowhere in sight. The Hotel del Coronado, not even on the radar yet. Here we are in San Diego. Now, why do I show this to you? Well, it's because whatever you were picturing, if it's palm trees or the beach or anything else, that's valid. That is San Diego. Equally valid is my image. The challenge we would have if we were to have a discussion about San Diego is I would be thinking one thing and you would be thinking something completely different. And when it comes back to engagement, let's bring it back to the topic, that's often one of the biggest challenges. If you ask a group of people in your organization, hey, what does employee engagement mean? You'll probably get a lot of great, valid-sounding answers, and they'll probably all be slightly different. It's tough to make something better if we can't agree on what we're working towards. So the first thing I want to share with you today is if you want to boost analyst engagement, you must first define it. And that definition needs to be something that you at your service desk, or better yet, in your entire organization, all agree on. Now, I want to give you a working definition for today's webinar. It's not the only definition. You don't have to adopt mine, but it gives you a starting point, and it'll give us a starting point for our conversation. I like to define engagement as the extent to which an employee is deliberately contributing to organizational success. And let's unpack this a little bit. An engaged employee is someone who knows what makes the organization or the service desk successful. And that person's committed to being a part of that. And we can see that with that Rackspace example that I shared with you. I'll show you in just a little bit how they define success, but just think about that commitment that we have. If I want to engage my employees, we need to have a consistent definition in our organization or our service desk that we all agree on. So this is the one we're going to use for the rest of the webinar. But again, I want to be clear that you can pick whatever definition you'd like as long as it's consistent within your organization. The one word of caution I'll have for you is sometimes organizations pick a definition that's really just the definition that's handed to them by a survey vendor. Or even worse, they define employee engagement not really in clear terms, but rather getting a certain score on a vendor-driven survey. That's not really engagement. Our goal isn't really to improve our survey score. It's to get the type of behavior that says this employee is engaged. So that's number one today. Define engagement, come up with a shared definition, and you're already moving towards some better results. Now, let's talk about number two. If the engagement means that our analysts understand what makes our organization or service desk successful and they're committed to it, we need to have a clear definition of success. Now, I want you to think about some of these common issues. How would your analyst define success? And part of the fun you could have here, you can, after this webinar, go ask your analyst, how do you define success around here? What's our ultimate goal? And I'll give you some areas that we might talk about. For example, service level agreements or SLAs. So how quickly are we responding? Do your analysts think of success as cherry picking the tickets and getting the ones they want to work on, or is it perhaps to service every customer quickly? Now, cherry picking happens often when we're trying to make our own workload easy, or we're trying to pad our SLA numbers. I've even heard of analysts closing tickets that aren't really resolved just to make those numbers look better. Now, to them, that's success because the SLA looks good, but in terms of the service we're providing to our customers, not so much. Now, how about service? If you survey your internal or external customers, is success defined as a good survey score, or is it ultimately happy end users? Those are different things. And sometimes we have survey scores that are artificially padded through things like survey bagging, where the design kind of leads people to give better scores. And sometimes we have happy end users who give us poor scores because they don't give 10s. They only give 7s when they're happy. You have to think about how you define that. What about the job that your analysts have? Do they look at their job as fixing stuff? Or maybe it's helping to get the people they support back to work or making them more efficient. All of those lead to different types of behaviors. And so if we define engagement as, I know what makes my team or my organization successful, and I'm committed to helping achieve it, we have to have a shared definition of success. And you could pick whatever definition you'd like, but just make sure that everybody agrees upon that. So let's go back to Rackspace. I gave you a Rackspace example at the start of this webinar where I talked about agents supporting their customers via their personal phone numbers. I'll give you a moment to read this. This is how Rackspace defines success for their organization. Now, as you read this, and I love it, it's called their fanatical support promise. What really strikes me is they're saying, hey, we're not going to promise perfection. The promise we're making to you is when something happens, we're going to step up. And I think we could all agree that tweeting your personal phone number is definitely stepping up. And so when we have a shared and common purpose, and we have a shared and common definition of success, it makes it easier for our analysts to be engaged. They have something specific to be engaged with. So that's number two. We have to define the success that we want all of our analysts to be engaged with. So here's a fun test. And you could do this again right after the webinar. Ask a random group of your analysts, or if you work in a small team, ask them all, ask them these questions. What is our customer service vision? Now that's what I call that definition of success, like the fanatical support promise that you saw with Rackspace. The customer service vision is simply a shared definition of outstanding service. It's what we're all working towards. Now, if you don't have one, then it's going to be really tough for them to answer that. But you might get some very similar types of responses anyways. If you do have a formal one, though, that's not always enough, having a formal statement. A lot of organizations, whether it's your service desk individually or your organization as a whole, they have this great statement. But when we try to break it down, that's where the confusion sets in. Okay, great, we got the statement we see on the wall everywhere. What does it mean? I worked with a service desk, and they had done a great job of getting the word out. There were posters everywhere, signs. I was talking to Analyst. He had a beautiful mug on his desk. They said, what's the customer service vision? He points to the mug and says, there it is. On the mug, we had an event, and we all know about it, and here it is. I said, that's fantastic. What does it mean? Crickets. He had no idea, never thought about it. Just, well, here it is. No idea. But when you start thinking about what it means, what the meaning is, that might change the conversation. So just because you have a fancy statement doesn't necessarily indicate that it has any meaning. So your analysts also have to say, well, here's what it means. And again, you want consistency. And then the last is, how do you personally contribute in your role? I was talking to a service desk leader, and he was telling me, hey, this company's got this great customer service vision, and everybody understands it. But on his team, the big question was, that's great, but that refers to things that I feel are outside of the service desk environment. It has nothing to do with the service desk in our organization. And so it feels like that vision is written for other people, but not us. And maybe your analysts feel the same way. We've got this great statement. It sounds good. Everybody talks about it, but I have no idea how my job connects to it. And remember, earlier I said that the definition of engagement I want to use is our employees understand what makes us successful and they're committed to it. Well, if they are not sure how to make that commitment, then it's tough for them to do that. So you can apply this test. Ask your analyst these 3 questions. You'll have an engaged set of analysts if you get very consistent answers, but you'll know where the work is to be done if you get inconsistent answers. So that brings us to number 3, which is to share the vision. We have this fancy statement that says, here is how we define outstanding service. We need to share this with our analysts. And share it means more than just give them a mug or a T-shirt or put a poster on the wall. Sharing it means having a discussion and talking about it and getting each analyst to be able to tell you, here's what I think our vision means, and here's how I can contribute in my specific role. And when you get to that point, engagement becomes much clearer because analysts can consistently say as a group, here's what we're all doing, here's what we're all working towards, and here's how each of us individually contributes. So that's number 3, share the vision. And if we kind of back this up, number 1 is you have to agree, what does engagement mean? Number 2, we have to define success for our service desk or our organization. And 3, we have to share that definition with our analysts so that they understand it and know how they're contributing. Now, I want to do another poll here if we can, Roy. Let's hear from everybody on another question, which is, how often do you measure engagement? And by measuring it, I'll let you decide what that means. A lot of us are doing surveys. Maybe it's originating with your service desk. Maybe it's originating somewhere else, like an outside vendor or your organization's human resources department. But let's see if we could get that poll up. How often do you measure engagement in your organization?
Now, let's take a look at the votes here and make sure that, yep, I see both coming in. So it is, in fact, live. And we'll give you a little more time to pick one of the answers.
And just for clarification, I know I couldn't come up with all the different buckets. So, if you measure it every day, then just pick monthly. And if it's somewhere between, if it's more than once a year, that would be less than annually. I probably should have made that clear. So some organizations, for example, it's very popular these days to do it every 18 months. That would be less than annually. So if my descriptions here are a little confusion, confusion. Start that over. If my descriptions here are a little confusing, I apologize. Hopefully that makes more sense.
Personally, I'm always confused, Jeff, so it's not a problem for me. Okay, let's stop the voting and look, see how the votes look, see how the votes look. And there you go. Here's our results.
All right. So fantastic. It looks like most of us that are measuring engagement, if we lump together annually and less than annually, it's 48% are measuring engagement once a year or less. And if we add in we don't measure engagement, that puts us up to 65% of us are once a year or less, including we don't even measure it. And some of us monthly, that's very cool, that's very progressive. Some of us every 3 to 6 months, we're getting there. I'm going somewhere with this, and let me share with you number 4. Number 4 tip, if I want to improve engagement, measure more frequently. Once a year is not enough. And I want you to think about it this way. Think about any other thing in your service desk that's important. And imagine that you measured it just once a year. So it could be looking at your queue, or it could be looking at your service level. Now, some of these things you look at every day, but even some of the bigger picture things like your budget or customer satisfaction. At least once a month, I imagine in your service desk, leaders are sitting down to review a scorecard of some kind, looking at the metrics and saying, how are we doing? What's going well? What's not going well? What do we need to continue doing? What do we need to improve upon? You can't do that if you only measure once a year or even once every 6 months. And so one of the biggest challenges organizations have with boosting engagement is the intervals that they use to measure it. Now, there are some challenges, and we should acknowledge that. One challenge, for example, is perhaps your service desk is tied into a bigger measurement initiative that your HR department is running. And they bring in a vendor once a year, and that's how you do it. And so you might say, hey, Jeff, that's great, but this part's out of our control. I get it. I want to give you a few different options here. So the formal survey once a year, if that's out of your control, that's fine. But let me give you a few different options so you can get data on engagement much more frequently, at least once per month. Your engagement snapshot should at least match the same pace and cadence as other important metrics in your organization. So typically we'd say this is monthly, we're doing some sort of roll-up. Now, if you have a small desk, so you have 10 people, 20 people either, I don't think you need to have a formal measurement or a survey. You could get around to talking to 20 people, having conversations with them. Better yet, if we look at the definition of engagement that I shared with you at the outset of this webinar, an analyst knows what makes our team successful, and they're committed to helping achieve that. I can see that in performance. I can see the actions that my analysts are taking that tell me, wow, they're engaged, or say they're not going above and beyond, or they're not putting in the effort necessary to help us achieve their success, our success, or they're even working against us. I can see it in performance. I don't need any kind of measurement. So in small teams, it becomes real easy. In fact, I think the survey sometimes gets in the way of conversation. Now, larger teams, maybe you're part of a service desk organization, a much bigger team, maybe you have multiple tiers of people, maybe you're part of a larger IT organization, and you've got a couple of hundred people, and maybe they're scattered all over the world. So here's what you can do. Still, performance is still key at the individual or unit level, but there's a couple of different options here. One is what I call a 1/12 or 1/6 survey, and here's how this works. Let's say I've got a service organization that's got several hundred people. I can divide that group into 12 random samples and survey each group once a month. So every individual analyst only gets one survey once a year, but every month as a leader I get a snapshot. Or the 1/6 survey is every analyst gets a survey twice a year. So if I have maybe a smaller team, just 100 people, I might divide that snapshot into 6 groups. And then every 6 months, each random group gets surveyed. So I'm getting more frequent data, and I'm not bothering my analysts with big surveys all the time. And so we're not driving survey fatigue amongst our analysts. So that gives you more frequent snapshots. Here's the nice thing about that. Because it's a little randomized, it's less subject to manipulation. And you've probably heard about some of these things. Maybe you've done it yourself. I'm not asking for confessions here. But the annual survey is really manipulated. How does that happen? A few things. I've heard of managers doing something like having a big pizza party, literally throwing a pizza party or doing something positive right before the survey comes out. I've heard of managers who have withheld negative events like employee discipline until after the survey was completed. Because many of us know when we're filling out a survey, it's not really a survey of the entire year. It's a survey of how do I feel right now. And how do I feel right now is usually driven by what's happened most recently. So these annual snapshots aren't really accurate indicators of an entire year's worth of engagement. It's usually, what's going on right now. And then the other challenge you have with the annual survey is if you have turnover on your team, then the annual snapshot is really a snapshot of maybe a slightly different group of people a year later. Now, the last piece, ESAT, Employee Satisfaction, or ENPS. So some of you might do Employee Net Promoter Score. It's essentially, would your employees recommend your team, your organization? The Pulse Check survey can be done very easily on a much more frequent basis. Rather than having people complete this gigantic form, maybe once a week or once a month, you ask everybody one question. How satisfied are you? And then tell us why. So that's another way to get some very quick feedback, and then you can do the work to see where the trends are, or maybe identify some other challenges that you're seeing across your team. Whatever works for your organization and your service desk is fine. I think the big thing here, though, is a once-a-year measurement. If that's the entire measurement campaign, that's not enough to give us meaningful data. I think in many cases, you're better off just not doing it. And if that's out of your hands, then adding some of your own measurements to what, let's say, your HR department's already doing, your whole organization's already doing, that's going to give you more valuable data than that once-a-year survey. So that's number 4, measure more frequently. I want to give you another example here. Hopefully you can see this picture clearly. This is a person. She's sitting at a table in a restaurant by herself, eating a meal, reading a book called Never Eat Alone. Now, let me tell you the backstory on this picture. And I blurred out her face it's not my intention here to embarrass anyone. If someone's watching this, but is that Karen? I have no idea what her name is. But the story is that she had attended a conference. And the keynote speaker at the conference was a guy named Keith Ferrazzi, and he was very motivational. His whole message was, our success in life comes from our network. And it's definitely true. I think it's a great message. And so he had this idea, like the premise, the title of the book is Never Eat Alone. Like if you have an opportunity to create a network, initiate conversation, it was more than just dining with people, of course, but it was really about building your network. And she had been to the conference. I know this not just because she had the book, but at her feet, she had the official conference tote bag. For example, if you go to HDI, if you're going to be there at HDI 2019, you might find tons of people in the airport afterwards with the official conference tote bag, right? It's really easy to spot people. So she had the tote bag from this conference, and there was probably 10 other tote bags just like hers scattered around this restaurant. So there were certainly opportunities to connect with people. Now, the interesting thing about this picture, though, is you could say, wow, she's really excited about this concept because she bought the book at the conference, and now she can't even wait to get home. She's reading it on her way home from the conference. Why do I tell you this story? This picture illustrates to me the difference between enthusiasm and commitment. She's clearly enthusiastic. She's gung-ho about this concept. She's also clearly not committed. If she were committed to the concept of never eat alone and build your network, there were at least 10 other people in that restaurant she could have reached out to and said, hey, you were at the conference too. Do you mind if I join you? Let's talk about it. That would be commitment. And so when we talk about employee engagement, I think one of the biggest challenges we have is there's a difference between enthusiasm and commitment. Enthusiasm is we do a survey, we form a committee, we throw up a banner, we tell everybody it's important, and then we do nothing. That's enthusiasm. Enthusiasm is the leader says, this year our main focus is employee engagement. No, as soon as you say that, you got it wrong. This isn't something we do as a side project or once a year. Employee engagement is either a way of doing business or it's not. Commitment is saying the only way for our service desk to really reach its full potential is to engage our analysts. And we're going to engage our analysts by making sure that we all agree on a shared definition of success, that employee engagement has the same meaning, that our analysts all understand what that success looks like, and we're helping our analysts achieve that success on a daily basis. And when we measure things around engagement, we're measuring the right things, and we're doing it as frequently as we measure anything else, because that's how important engagement is to us. So that's what a commitment looks like. It's not a theme for the year. It's not something you're going to do as a side project or a blue ribbon committee that meets a bunch of times and comes back with a great report and nothing happens. That's enthusiasm. It's temporary. It's fleeting. It's ephemeral. Commitment is this is how we do things. And you'll notice a big difference in engagement when you move from enthusiasm to commitment. So I've given you a lot to think of. I want to give you one example here of all of that put together and what that looks like, and two different Tier 1 versus Tier 2 teams. Now, some of you may work in an environment where you have multiple tiers of support, and I want to give you two examples here. And we're starting with this idea that engagement is the extent to which an employee is deliberately contributing to organizational success. So success is defined, employees are committed. In one environment, Tier 1 versus Tier 2, they didn't have a clear definition of success. But what they did have was an incentive. And it said, hey, if you get a certain score, I think it was 90% on your customer surveys every month, if you average 90%, we're going to give you $100. So that was the metric. That's how they inadvertently defined success for their agents, by doing that. Now, you could probably imagine what could go wrong. In this case, the Tier 1 team said, so let me get this straight. If I get 90% of my customers to give me a thumbs up, I'll get $100. Well, then the last thing I want to do is to deal with an unhappy customer. So the moment I detect any hint of frustration in somebody's voice, I am going to transfer them to Tier 2. Oh, it sounds like you're mighty upset about that password reset issue. You know what? Let me transfer you to Tier 2. They're the excellent team that can help you out. So they transfer all these garbage issues that they absolutely could have handled. And by garbage issues, I mean they're making them the garbage issues. Instead of handling themselves, they're pushing these upset customers to the Tier 2 team. And it worked beautifully. The Tier 1 team kept hitting their bonus. And the Tier 2 team was really upset. In fact, after a while, the Tier 2 folks realized you could make more money if you factor in the bonus on Tier 1 and deal with fewer headaches. And so fewer and fewer people wanted to work on Tier 2. So that's how one organization did it. They didn't have engaged analysts because they created this incentive that worked against what the organization was really trying to do. Let me give you another example of a service desk where they did things completely different. No incentive. The goal here, the way they defined success was, hey, we're supporting our company's products, and we want to leave the people we support better off at the end of the interaction than they were at the beginning. We want to help them get the most out of these products. And so one of the things the Tier 1 and Tier 2 teams did working together as part of that commitment is they said, hey, we know that people don't like getting escalated, don't like getting transferred, and we do it when we have to, but if there's a way that we could prevent some of that, that would be great. And so as a team, they took it upon themselves to look at the top 10 reasons that an issue would be escalated from Tier 1 to Tier 2. And they found about 5 of them could probably be handled at the Tier 1 level if that team just had a couple more pieces of information, maybe a couple of updates to the knowledge base, or just knew a couple of simple tricks. And they were able to quickly reduce the amount of escalations, which was great because they were able to help customers faster. And the Tier 2 team now had a little bit more bandwidth to spend more time with the people who really needed their help. So those two examples kind of highlight the difference between employees who are disengaged and employees who are understand what success means and they're committed to helping achieve it. All right. So I've given you, I think, a lot to think about, and I think we've got probably some questions from the audience, Roy, and then also something special I want to share with you, everybody who's tuned into the webinar today. So what should we start with first?
Let's do some Q&A, shall we?
All right.
What do you think? All right.
That sounds great. Let's hear it.
Here's a good one. It says, the company I work for uses Tiny Pulse to ask feedback, engagement-type questions to the whole company. Would doing a service desk-focused ESAT alongside that be beneficial?
So I'm not familiar with that particular vendor, so I have to answer it from just kind of a more in general perspective of, hey, we've got a pulse level survey that goes through the entire organization. Should I do something on my own? I think the real question behind that should be, what are you aiming for? What are you trying to gain? And so if I can get valuable data to help me improve engagement from the initiative my company's already doing, and it's a good survey, the pulse check happens at a frequent interval, et cetera, then my preference and suggestion would be to stick with that. Why ask our analysts to do another survey? Why give yourself more work, more reporting, et cetera? On the other hand, if your goal is to improve engagement and you're finding that survey is not giving you data to help you do that because it's not constructed properly, you're not getting the responses, they're not happening frequently enough. If that's the case, then yes, I think you should do something on your own. So start with what's your goal? Is the current tool helping you achieve your goal? And if yes, stick with it. If no, do something on your own. My preference is always to default to let's do what the rest of the organization is doing. That's really what most healthy and mature organizations do. But sometimes as a leader, hey, I've got to fix something. I can't wait for somebody else to fix it. So I hope that helps. It really depends on whether the current initiative is helping you or not.
Thank you, sir. This one says, how much of Rackspace's engagement comes from their hiring practices? Is that the most important thing?
It's hard to put a percentage on it. I would say it's part of the formula. And is it the most important thing? So yes and no. Here's what I've observed, and I wish I could give you data to back this up. This is from my own experience talking to thousands of customer service professionals broadly, including support and service desk professionals over the years. In my observation, I want you to imagine a bell curve. And at one end of the bell curve are the all-stars. And we certainly want to hire those all-stars, and they will heavily influence the team. At the other end of the bell curve are the people that you never want to hire them. They're going to be terrible no matter where they work, right? And then in the middle are kind of the average people. And I think you want to hire really good people, and certainly Rackspace works towards doing that. But I found if you put an average person in a great environment, you will get great performance. And if you put that same average person in a bad environment, you will get bad performance. So hiring is important at organizations like Rackspace, but so is everything else they do to support that. In other words, one of the famous examples at Rackspace, just in terms of empowerment, is there was a call that was going on long. They were supporting, again, this is an external user support call. And the person on this long call happened to mention, wow, I'm really getting hungry. And so while they were working through it, the analyst ordered a pizza for her customer. Now, that's just cool. Now, is that because we hired the right person? Yeah, absolutely, you hired the right person. But if we worked in an environment where doing something like that was absolutely forbidden and could get you fired and frowned upon, then it wouldn't happen no matter who you hired. So you have to have, I think, the full formula, which is we've defined success. We hire people who are committed to that, but we also create an environment where they can go to work each day and achieve that success. So it's really the full formula. I wish I had a percentage or more data to give you, but it's the formula, the full thing.
When in doubt, say 56.2%. It's always worked for me, Jeff.
There you go. All right, I will remember that.
56.2%. This is an interesting question. Some employees just want to come to work, earn money, and go home. Is that okay? And I've worked with some folks like that, and they have done a good job. So what's your answer to that one?
So this is where having a definition of engagement is super helpful, right? If our definition of engagement is enthusiasm,
Yeah, for sure.
But maybe that's not okay, right? They're not enthusiastic enough. But if our definition of engagement is, I'm here.
Oh, I think Jeff is gone. So I'm going to tap dance here for a few minutes until Jeff is able to dial back in and get back into the presentation. We lost him.
I'm on the call.
Sorry
Can you
about
not
that,
hear me?
folks. He'll be right back. I'm going to say personally what I think about this, and we'll see what Jeff has to say when he gets back.
Roy, can you hear me?
I think that people who do a good job sometimes unintentionally are doing a good job because that's their work ethic. They just want to come to work and get paid and go home. But in fact, while they're there, they're engaged in their work. They like their work. They want to do a good job, and they do a good job. And that's a form of engagement as well. And it's important to do that, and important to recognize that. We got a couple of tough questions. Are you back, Jeff? Can you hear me? Are you back, sir?
I've been here the whole time. This is so weird. I could hear you. Thanks for tap dancing.
Oh, no problem. It's what I do.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think you got it. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay. Well,
sorry about that.
Support. Yeah, that's okay. I don't know what happened, but we'll go with it. And Roy, I think you nailed it. When you define engagement, I think if you have an employee who shows up and does their job every day and they're committed to success, even if they're not going to go above and beyond, but they're committed to success and they're solid, we need those people on our team. We need people that we can rely upon and depend on, and we know what they're going to get from them. So I don't think that there's necessarily a problem with that. Oh, are you there?
I am indeed here.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, we're hearing each other okay?
All right. Well,
thank you, audience, by the way, for sending in the things that I can hear Jeff. I appreciate that, even though I wasn't hearing him. So
all right.
We have a couple more questions here. How can we keep those employee surveys from being fudged? Because managers will be looking at them and employees want them to think they're engaged. Well, that's always a tricky one.
It is. I think if that's the environment you're working in, then that's all you need to know. I really think that's an environment of kind of fear and trying to convince managers otherwise. That speaks to a much broader issue than the survey. And so again, I want you to think beyond the survey. Employee engagement is not a survey. Employee engagement, again, using the working definition today, is people know what makes the organization successful, and they're committed to helping achieve it. And so if I'm having an ongoing, open and honest dialogue with my team about how do we help the people that we support better? What are the challenges that get in the way? How do we deal with those challenges? Then I'm not worried about the survey so much. But if I don't have that open and honest dialogue and I'm worried about fudging the score, I probably have a much deeper problem.
Cool. This is a great question. What is the best way to keep remote employees engaged?
So I love that question because I hear it coming up more and more and more. And sometimes with remote employees, it's out of sight, out of mind. And I think you need to make a conscious and conscientious effort to avoid that as a leader. So again, we'll go back to the definition of engagement. You can create whatever definition you'd like, but my preference is we know what success is, they're committed to helping achieve that. So just like any employee, we're always working with them to make sure they understand that success definition and that their work is reflecting that commitment. Beyond that, though, I think there's many ways to get people involved, and I can give you a few examples. One is if you have the ability to do meetings via video conferencing. A lot of organizations use tools like Zoom now and others to bring people together not only on audio but face-to-face via video. That it's not necessarily engagement, but it's a facet of engagement, which is team building, right? And it's culture building. So bringing people together that way, if you have the opportunity to physically bring people together, even if it's on occasion for, a team meeting or something like that, that's something that you can do. I'll even give you a really cool example. It's not from a service desk, but it was an internal support environment. I did a tour at Starbucks a few years ago, and I was touring their internal HR contact center. So if you worked at Starbucks and you had an HR issue that your manager at your store couldn't help with, you would contact this team. And so it's very much like a different type of service support center. And it was really cool. They had a lot of remote employees. As part of this tour, they had one of the remote employees lead us all on a coffee tasting. So we had coffee in front of us, and she had coffee in front of her, and she was able to walk us through this. So she's part of the tour, even though she's not physically present. And that was a way of making her part of the team's success through some deliberate action. So just always come back to that definition, which is everybody understands success, and we're trying to earn their commitment. And if you're conscientious about that, I think you'll find tons of ways to get your remote people involved.
Excellent. And I've seen that work for global companies that have, a follow the sun service desk or distributed teams across different countries too. It's video is your friend there for sure. Here's a great question. What do you do if you're trying to foster engagement and in a great work environment, but the overall manager or director for the service department has a tendency to unintentionally shoot down or damage the engagement you create?
So I'm guessing, Roy, the person asking this question is talking about maybe their boss or their boss's boss, the overall leader. And here's where I've got some bad news for you. I'm still working on the answer to that question, because engagement and a service culture, which is what we're really talking about today, that can only rise to the level of leadership that supports it. And so on your team, if you want engaged employees, I think you could do everything you can to follow some of the tips that we talked about today. You've defined engagement, you've defined success, you secure commitment. But it's always going to be a little bit of an uphill battle. And I don't really know how to change that leader. I think there's some ways that you can nudge some behaviors to manage up, if you will. Getting that person's agreement, for example, on a definition of engagement can help. Because rather than saying, I think you're undermining the team or something really bad like that, you can say, hey, we agreed that this is what we're doing, and here's what's actually happening. You have to be careful about that, but you can nudge a little bit. But short of inviting that leader to be part of the process, some people are just not really designed to be great leaders, yet they're in leadership positions. I saw one support team leader. This is what he said to a service desk in front of me, the consultant. He says, if you don't start improving performance, you're all fired. And that's, not motivational. So I said to this guy, well, what exactly would you like them to do? And he couldn't even describe what he wanted them to do. He just said, just do better. And it's like, it's you. You should fire yourself. You can't even describe what you want. So there's just some people that should not be leaders, and I don't know what your situation is like, but I think at the end of the day, you got to do the best you can with what you can control. Try to influence as best you can what you cannot control, but I don't have a great solution that's perfectly designed to fix that leader, because I think that's a challenge that many of us face.
Cool. And I have one more question from the audience. It says, how do we reward engaged employees without putting off others? Sometimes it seems like engagement means pro-company, and I'm guessing that means something like gung-ho, or teacher's pet. So maybe there's a little stigma attached to being engaged, in quotes. How do you deal with that? How do you reward folks for being engaged?
So let's unpack this a little bit, Roy. I want to separate, and it's hard to know without getting more from the person who asked the question. I think the question's terrific. I just don't want to misunderstand it. So I'm going to unpack the term reward first, and then I want to answer it. Reward, sometimes gets lumped in with another term, recognition. And I want to separate the two. A reward, the way I use the definition, is an if-then proposition. In other words, if you do this, then you will get this prize, whatever it may be. Maybe it's that $100 bonus or a gift card or a day off. I don't think rewards are generally healthy. I think rewards are disengagement mechanisms because, like the example I gave you with the Tier 1 team that was escalating all these unnecessary transfers, people start focusing on the reward and not on the behavior. Now, recognition, on the other hand, is different. Recognition is unexpected, and it happens afterwards. So let's say someone's doing something really good. Recognition would be, hey, you went above and beyond for that customer. I really appreciate it. You know, here's a gift card, or here's a prize, or here's just a acknowledgement that what you're doing is great. So I want you to kind of sense the difference. I think rewards generally are very unhealthy. We're making a very dangerous assumption that our analysts don't naturally want to help people. I think they do. And recognition, on the other hand, is saying, you're on the right track. Please keep doing it. And so recognition is really healthy. And I would, if we're using those definitions, then I'd say, well, if some people are not getting recognition, it should be because they're not exhibiting behaviors that are showing a commitment to our success. Well, I need to manage that. And so hopefully that makes sense. Now, if the person asking is thinking more things like Employee of the Month programs and competitions, et cetera, again, I think those are generally destructive. I don't think they promote engagement. Maybe for one person or the two people who kind of swap spots each month winning Employee of the Month, but for everybody else, it doesn't help. What I see is much more healthy is kind of more team-oriented goals and recognition. So instead of saying, you know, whoever gets the best survey score gets a prize, and I'm going to reward you and call that engagement, I don't think that's engagement. What I do think is engagement is something that's team-focused to say, all right, as a team, this is the biggest issue we're facing. How can we come together as a team and fix this issue and you know, improve by 10% by the end of the month? And then as a team, we come back together and see how we did. And maybe as a leader, you could say, hey, everybody, you did so well, you worked so hard, I'm going to surprise you with this, you know, I'm going to buy you lunch today. So it's unexpected, but it's a way of saying thank you. So I hope I understood the person's question correctly, and I hope, you know, whoever asked this, I unpack this for you a little bit. I think there's a big difference between rewards and recognition, and generally speaking, I think rewards are destructive when it comes to engagement rather than constructive.
Awesome. That's a great answer to that, and probably covered the bases no matter exactly what they meant. So I'm sure that they understand their question better now than they did when they asked it.
Maybe. We always hope.
That's great. So I just wanted to remind folks here after the Q&A, before you leave today, and don't leave yet, before you leave today, to rate the webinar. It's very helpful for us to know what you thought, so that we know how we might be able to improve things as we go along. We do pay attention to those ratings. It's really important. So we'd appreciate you just taking a second to click on one of the stars that represents how you felt about today's webinar. So, Jeff, I think you might have a special offer for our attendees today.
I do, and some of you may have this already, but you're ahead of me. But I've just launched a book this week called Customer Service Tip of the Week. It's exactly what you think it is. It's a collection of over 52 ideas and reminders. It's based upon an email I send out once a week. I know a lot of service desks, service analysts all over the world subscribe already. And so the idea is there's nothing earth-shattering, I think, in this book in terms of tips you've never heard of. Rather, it's a way to consistently reinforce the skills we should be working on. I think we know that if we don't consistently work on something, we get a little rusty. So it's a tool for constant reinforcement. And I want to give you a copy of this book in PDF format for free. And all you have to do is visit the website you see on the screen, toistersolutions.com/tips. Sign up for the weekly email. You can share this with your team or have your analysts subscribe on their own. It's up to you. You'll even get ideas on how to use these tips to reinforce service with your team. And when you do sign up, you'll get a little welcome email that will allow you to download a PDF version of the book. Now, if you want the more user-friendly paperback, You can get it on Amazon for single copies or 800 CEO read. And I know budgets are tight, so I priced it at $9.95 per book. If you're buying more than just a few copies, an 800 CEO read, that price point goes down a couple of bucks. So I really want to make it as accessible as possible, but you don't have to spend any money. Again, you could just sign up and get the PDF version of the book for free. If you do want to buy the book, if you buy it by Friday, and you'll see more information if you go to that website, send me your mailing address. I'll send you a signed book plate so you can turn your paperback into an autographed version. And I've got some more goodies. If you're thinking about maybe buying copies for your team, depending on how many you buy, I've got some goodies for you, including an hour phone coaching session or even a webinar for your entire service desk. So lots of goodies there. I invite you to check it out. And are you still there, Roy?
I am indeed here. Sorry, I wanted to remind folks that in the Attachments tab on the Bright Talk screen, there is a link to Jeff Toister book offer. So that takes them directly to that site that you have listed, and folks can use that to get there right away. No waiting. Take you right there. Okay, great. Thanks, Jeff. And also, a couple of reminders. We've been through our Q&As now. Our next regularly scheduled webinar will be on Tuesday, October 23rd at 1 p.m., and that's about increasing employee satisfaction by reducing friction. So we've seen a lot of content these days about increasing employee satisfaction and how important that is. And one thing I just wanted to mention before we part company today is that a couple of years ago, in going through the data for our annual industry report, I noticed, I always look at the customer satisfaction ratings, and we also had employee satisfaction ratings, and I wanted to see if there's a correlation between the two, because we always hear, happy employees, happy customers, right? So we took the 416 companies that said they had high or either satisfied or very satisfied employees, and looked at their customer satisfaction rating. And what we found was that the customer satisfaction rating was, on average, 5% higher in companies that had satisfied or very satisfied employees. So it is true that happy employees make for happy customers. So that's a good selling point as well for you who want to improve your employee engagement, employee satisfaction. Don't forget that it does affect your customers. What happens on the inside is felt on the outside, right? So come back and visit us on October 23rd of the webinar. And meanwhile, I wanted to say a great big thank you to Jeff Toister for sharing Customer Service Week with us. Always good to talk to you, Jeff. And we had a couple of little technical glitches today, but we got it, baby. and thanks again.
It was my pleasure, Roy. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. This webcast is copyright 2018 by United Business Media, LLC. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted, if that is the case, by HDI, which is solely responsible for its content, and the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. On behalf of HDI, thanks for your time. Happy Customer Service Week. Have a great day.